The chill in the air on the penthouse balcony had little to do with the December weather. It was a cold that seeped from within, a frost that had been settling over Eleanor's heart for years. Below, the city glittered like a spilled box of jewels, a breathtaking panorama of life and light that felt a million miles away from the silent tension in her gilded cage. Christmas Eve, a night meant for warmth and connection, felt like the final, fragile pane of glass in a window that was about to shatter. Inside, the party was a symphony of forced cheerfulness. Richard, her husband of 20 years, moved through the crowd with an easy charm that never failed to captivate strangers and never failed to make Eleanor feel more invisible. He was a master of the grand gesture, the public declaration, the perfectly curated image of success. Their penthouse, the parties, her designer dresses, they were all props in the grand play of Richard's life, and she was beginning to feel like the most disposable prop of all. For weeks, he had been obsessed with one thing: the family Christmas photo. Not just any photo, but a masterpiece of holiday perfection, to be taken on Jajic's balcony with the sparkling skyline as their backdrop. It was for his company's newsletter, his social media, his legacy. "It has to be perfect, Ellie," he'd said, his voice tight with a pressure she knew all too well. The photographer, a young, nervous man handpicked by Richard, was finally ready. Their 2 children, now young adults, were home from college, their faces a mixture of holiday spirit and weary resignation to their father's demands. Olivia, ever the peacemaker, smoothed her velvet dress, while Thomas, a mirror of his father's ambition but not his coldness, adjusted his tie. "All right, everyone, on the balcony," Richard announced, clapping his hands together. "Let's get this done. The light is perfect." Eleanor, who had spent 2 hours ensuring her hair and makeup were flawless, moved to join them. She imagined the photo, the 4 of them, a perfect family silhouetted against a perfect view. It was a lie, but it was a familiar one. She reached the glass door, a practiced smile already forming on her lips. That's when Richard turned, his hand held up to stop her. He didn't look at her. His eyes were on the photographer, directing the scene. "Not this one, Ellie," he said, the words casual, almost an afterthought. Eleanor froze, the smile faltering. "What? Richard? The photographer is waiting." He finally glanced at her, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if she were a piece of furniture that was out of place. "This is for the company. A family shot, yes, but it's about the next generation. Me, Olivia, and Thomas. It tells a better story. You understand." He didn't phrase it as a question. It was a statement, a dismissal. Her role in the story of his life had just been declared over. In front of her children, in front of the photographer, in front of the ghost of 20 years of marriage, he had erased her from the picture. The humiliation was a physical blow, hot and sharp. Olivia opened her mouth to protest, a flash of loyalty in her eyes, but a sharp look from Richard silenced her. Thomas simply stared at the floor, his jaw tight. "You're not in this one," he repeated, his voice a little firmer this time, a clear dismissal. He then turned back to the photographer, completely absorbed. "Okay, Thomas on my right, Olivia on my left. Let's look like we own the city." Eleanor stood motionless, the sound of the party fading into a dull roar in her ears. She watched as the 3 of them posed, Richard beaming, his arms around the children who looked stiff and uncomfortable. The photographer's flash blinked, capturing the perfect incomplete family. Blink. A father and his heirs. Blink. A man and his legacy. Blink. A picture where she no longer belonged. Each flash of the camera was like a tiny dagger, carving away a piece of her. The years of swallowing her own dreams to support his, of managing their home so he could build his empire, of raising their children while he was busy closing deals, all of it rendered invisible. He didn't just want her to stand outside the picture, he wanted her to not exist within it. When they were done, Richard ushered the children back inside, patting the photographer on the back. "Perfect. Send the proofs to my assistant." He walked right past Eleanor, as if she were a statue, and grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray. Left alone on the balcony, the biting wind was a cold slap of reality. The glittering city lights below seemed to mock her, so full of life and promise while she felt hollowed out. But as the minutes passed, the initial shock of pain began to crystallize into something else. It was a hard, cold, and surprisingly clear feeling. Anger. An anger so pure it was almost calming. She had played her part. She had been the supportive wife, the perfect hostess, the doting mother. And for what? To be told she wasn't part of the story anymore? A sudden, rebellious thought sparked in her mind. He wanted a picture without her. Fine. She would have a picture without him. With a resolve she hadn't felt in years, she turned to the photographer who was packing his equipment. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "I'd like you to take one more photo." The young man looked nervously toward the party. "I don't know, sir. I'm not asking him," Eleanor said, her voice dropping, now laced with steel. "I'm asking you, and I will pay you double." She walked to the center of the balcony, the spot where her family had just been. She didn't smile. She let the hurt, the anger, the newfound resolve settle on her face. She looked directly into the camera lens, not as a wife or a mother, but as Eleanor. Just Eleanor. Alone. In front of the penthouse she had helped build, a queen in a kingdom that had just disowned her. "Go ahead," she said. "Take the picture." The photographer was taken aback, his eyes darting from Eleanor's resolute face to the bustling party inside. He was just starting his career, and the man who had hired him, Richard, was a powerful client he couldn't afford to offend. Yet there was something in this woman's gaze, a command born not of arrogance, but of deep, raw conviction that made refusal impossible. He saw not the wife of a magnate, but a woman claiming her own space. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he whispered, raising his camera again. "Where do you want to stand?" "Right here is perfect," Eleanor replied, her voice unwavering. She stood alone, the city lights creating a halo around her elegant silhouette. The wind whipped a few strands of hair across her face, but she didn't brush them away. She let the imperfection be part of the image. This was not about curated perfection. This was about raw truth. She held her head high, her posture exuding a grace that had been dormant for too long. She wasn't smiling, but her expression was not one of sadness. It was a complex tapestry of sorrow, defiance, and a nascent, powerful freedom. It was the face of a woman who had just realized the cage was only a cage if you believed in its bars. She looked straight down the barrel of the lens, channeling 20 years of quiet compromises, of swallowed words, of being an accessory to someone else's life, into one single, potent look. The photographer took a deep breath and began to shoot. Click. The sound was different this time. It wasn't a hollow capture of a fabricated family moment. It felt real, heavy with unspoken narrative. Click. He saw it through his lens. The end of one story and the terrifying, thrilling beginning of another. Click. He took more shots than he needed to, circling her, capturing different angles of her silent rebellion against the glittering, empty backdrop of her life. He was no longer just a hired hand. He was a witness. "Thank you," Eleanor said finally, the session lasting no more than 2 minutes. She pulled a small, elegant card from her purse. "This is my personal account. Send your invoice here and add a 0 to whatever you were going to charge my husband." She didn't wait for his reply. With a final, long look at the city that had been her prison and was now her witness, she turned and walked back inside. But she didn't rejoin the party. The laughter and clinking glasses seemed to belong to another world, a life she had already shed. She walked past the guests, her head held high, a woman on a mission. No one seemed to notice. They were too caught up in Richard's orbit. She went straight to their bedroom, a vast, opulent space that suddenly felt cold and impersonal. Her hands moved with a strange calmness, a clarity of purpose she hadn't experienced in decades. She didn't pack a suitcase with designer clothes or expensive jewelry. That was the life of Mrs. Richard. She was looking for Eleanor. From the back of her closet, she pulled out a small, worn leather satchel, a bag she'd bought on a solo trip to Florence before she was married, a trip filled with art, discovery, and a sense of boundless possibility. She began to fill it, not with things of value, but with things of meaning. A tarnished silver locket from her grandmother, a small dog-eared book of poetry by Mary Oliver that she kept hidden in a drawer, her old journals, filled with sketches and thoughts from a person she barely recognized anymore. She packed a simple set of clothes, a pair of comfortable flat shoes, and her passport. As she was zipping the bag, the door creaked open. Olivia stood there, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning understanding. Thomas was right behind her, his face pale. "Mom?" Olivia whispered, stepping into the room. "What are you doing?" Eleanor looked at her children, her heart aching with a love so fierce it almost buckled her knees. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Where are you going?" Thomas asked, his voice cracking slightly. He was trying to be the man of the house, but he was still just her boy. "I don't know yet," Eleanor admitted, and the honesty of it was liberating. "Somewhere I can be in the picture," My own picture. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, a flicker of her mother's strength in her gaze. He had no right, she said, her voice trembling with anger. To say that to you. Eleanor went to her daughter and cupped her face, wiping a tear with her thumb. No, he didn't. But he did me a favor. He reminded me of who I am without him. She then looked at Thomas, who was struggling to process everything. Be good to each other. Your father, he loves you in his own way. But don't let his story erase yours. She hugged them both tightly, breathing in the scent of them, the two best parts of her life. It was the hardest thing she had ever had to do, but she knew it was also the most necessary. Letting them go was a part of letting herself be free. With her small bag in hand, she walked out of the bedroom, leaving her opulent life behind. She passed the living room, where Richard was holding court, laughing loudly at one of his own jokes. He didn't even look up. On a marble console table by the door, she placed her key to the penthouse and the platinum credit card Richard always insisted she carry. She didn't need them where she was going. As the elevator doors closed, she caught a final glimpse of the party, a perfect tableau of wealth and success. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was missing out. She felt like she was escaping. The doors slid shut, and Eleanor began her descent, alone and finally, beautifully, free. The opulent lobby of the skyscraper felt like another planet as Eleanor stepped out of the elevator. The doorman, a man she had exchanged polite pleasantries with for years, rushed to open the heavy glass door for her. "Happy Christmas, Mrs. Davies," he said with a practiced smile. For a fleeting second, she considered telling him her name was Eleanor, but she simply nodded, the title feeling like a costume she was finally shedding. "Happy Christmas," she replied, her voice steady. The cold night air hit her, but this time it felt different. It was no longer the oppressive chill of the balcony, but the crisp, clean air of freedom. The city streets, usually a chaotic symphony of noise and hurry, were quieter on Christmas Eve. Snow had begun to fall, soft, silent flakes dusting the pavement and muffling the world. It felt like a fresh blanket being laid over her old life. Eleanor walked, her small satchel feeling impossibly light in her hand. She had no destination in mind, just a need to put distance between herself and the penthouse in the sky. She walked for blocks, past glowing shop windows displaying festive scenes that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. She wasn't sad. She was numb, suspended in the surreal space between a past that had just ended and a future that was a complete unknown. After 20 minutes of walking, she spotted a small, unassuming hotel tucked between a bookstore and a cafe. The Hotel Elysian. It was old, with a modest, glowing sign that promised little more than a clean room and a warm bed. It was the antithesis of the life she had just left. No marble floors, no grand chandeliers, just quiet anonymity. It was perfect. The man at the front desk was old and wore a slightly frayed cardigan. He looked up from his newspaper, surprised to see anyone checking in so late on Christmas Eve. "A room for one," Eleanor said, placing a debit card from her personal account on the counter, an account Richard knew nothing about, fed over the years by small, secret inheritances from her side of the family. "Just for the night?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'm not sure yet," she said truthfully. The room was on the third floor, overlooking a quiet side street. It was small, simple, and clean. There was a bed, a small desk, and a window with a view of the brick wall of the next building. There was no glittering skyline. There was only the sound of her own breathing in the quiet space. She dropped her satchel on the bed and sank into the worn armchair by the window, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the noise of the party she had fled. For the first hour, she did nothing but sit. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, and with it came the grief. It washed over her in silent waves, not grief for Richard, but grief for the years she had lost, for the woman she had packed away in favor of being a wife. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to cry on the balcony began to fall, hot and silent. They weren't tears of self-pity, but of release, a cleansing storm. After the tears subsided, a profound stillness settled over her. She felt hollowed out, but also strangely peaceful. She opened her satchel and took out the book of poetry. Her fingers traced the worn cover before opening it to a random page. The poem that greeted her was The Journey by Mary Oliver. She read the first few lines aloud, her voice a whisper in the quiet room. "One day, you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice." A small, watery smile touched her lips. She had finally begun. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It It was an email from an unknown address. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. The subject line was simple: "Your photo." It was from the photographer. Attached were a dozen images, and as she clicked on the first one, her breath caught in her throat. It was her. Standing alone on that balcony, the city lights blurred behind her like a distant, forgotten world. Her expression was everything she had felt: the pain, the defiance, the anger, the liberation. It wasn't the face of a victim. It was the face of a survivor. She looked powerful. She looked real. She looked like a woman she wanted to know. She scrolled through the rest. Each one was a testament to the moment her life had fractured and reformed. He had captured not just an image, but a resurrection. The final photo was his favorite. He wrote in the email. It was a close-up, her face half in shadow, the wind in her hair, her eyes looking directly at the camera, unflinching and fierce. "This is you," the photographer had written at the bottom of the email. "I hope you see it." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were different. They were tears of recognition. He did see it. And now, so did she. That woman on the screen was not Mrs. Richard Davies. She was Eleanor, and her journey was just beginning. She saved the photo, her photo, to her phone. It was her declaration of independence, her new compass. Whatever came next, she would face it as this woman, alone and finally, whole. Christmas morning arrived not with the familiar orchestrated cheer of the penthouse, but with the gentle gray light filtering into her small hotel room. For the first time in 20 years, Eleanor woke up alone on Christmas Day. There was no rush to prepare a lavish brunch, no carefully selected presents to arrange under a towering tree, no pressure to perform happiness for guests. The silence was absolute, and in it she found not loneliness, but a profound sense of peace. It was a blank canvas. She dressed in the simple, comfortable clothes she had packed and left the hotel, stepping out into a city hushed by a fresh layer of snow. On any other Christmas, she would have been chauffeured from her climate-controlled apartment to a climate-controlled destination. Today, she walked. She felt the cold on her cheeks, heard the crunch of snow under her boots, and saw the city with fresh eyes. Her feet led her to the bookstore she had noticed the night before. A small sign on the door said, "Open 10 a.m., 2 p.m. for any lonely souls." Eleanor smiled and went inside. The air smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. It was a scent from a life she'd almost forgotten she'd lived. A life where she spent hours in university libraries, lost in worlds of art and history. She ran her fingers over the spines of books, a simple, tactile pleasure. Her passion had been Renaissance art, specifically the female artists who had been largely written out of the mainstream narrative. Richard had always found it a quaint hobby, not something befitting the wife of a CEO. On a dusty lower shelf, she found a thick volume on Artemisia Gentileschi, a painter whose work was filled with a raw, fierce power that had always fascinated Eleanor. She bought the book, the purchase feeling like a quiet act of reclamation. As she sat in the bookstore's small cafe, sipping a latte, her phone, which she had almost forgotten, buzzed violently on the table. It was Richard. A rapid-fire series of texts appeared on the screen. "Where the hell are you? Do you have any idea the scene you've caused? People are asking questions. This is the most selfish, childish thing you have ever done. Call me, now." There was no, "Are you okay?" No worry. Only anger at the disruption to his perfectly curated world. The Eleanor of yesterday would have felt a surge of panic, a desperate need to smooth things over. But the woman sitting in the cafe, the woman who had stood alone on the balcony, felt nothing but a distant pity. His words had no power over her anymore. They were the frantic shouts of a man who had just lost control of his favorite prop. With a calm, deliberate movement, she powered the phone off completely. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound she had ever heard. Her thoughts turned to Olivia and Thomas. A sharp pang of maternal guilt hit her. She had left them. But it was immediately followed by a wave of clarity. What kind of example had she been setting? To stay? To be diminished? Showing them how to live truthfully was a far greater gift than any she could have bought them. She powered the phone back on just long enough to send a single text to Olivia. "I am safe. I love you more than words can say. I needed to do this for myself. We'll explain everything soon." Then she turned it off again. She thought of the photo on her phone. The woman in that image wouldn't hide. She wouldn't shrink. She would build. Back in her hotel room, Eleanor opened her laptop. The secret bank account Richard didn't know about contained more than she had realized, a nest egg built from inheritances her parents had insisted on keeping separate. It was a significant sum. For years it had sat dormant, a silent testament to a life she might have had. Now, it was the foundation for the life she would create. She remembered the hollow feeling of her charity work as Mrs. Davies, attending galas, writing checks from Richard's account, smiling for photos. It was another performance. Now she wanted to do something real. She spent hours researching, a focus she hadn't felt in years igniting within her. She found a local organization, a shelter for women and children fleeing domestic abuse, a place that didn't just offer a bed, but also legal aid, job training, and psychological support. With a few clicks, she made a donation. It was anonymous, substantial, and the first major financial decision she had made entirely on her own in 2 decades. It was a transfer of funds not just from one account to another, but a transfer of power back to herself. The act didn't feel like charity. It felt like an investment in a world she wanted to be a part of. A new idea began to form, a fragile but exciting seed. Her life with Richard had been about curating an image of hollow perfection. What if she could curate something real? What if she could use her resources, her eye for detail, and her newfound strength to create spaces of genuine safety and beauty for those who needed it most? That evening, as she walked back to her hotel, she caught her reflection in a dark shop window. She saw a woman in a simple coat, her face illuminated by the streetlights, her eyes clear and full of a quiet, determined light. She didn't see a victim. She didn't see a runaway wife. She saw Eleanor. And for the first time in a very long time, she was excited to see what she would do next. 6 months later, the city was in the full bloom of summer, but Eleanor barely noticed the change in season. She was too busy building a new world. The anonymous donation had been just the beginning. A few weeks after that Christmas, she had walked into the offices of the women's shelter, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a volunteer. Her small, elegant apartment, rented in a quiet neighborhood she'd come to love, was her sanctuary. The only photograph on the wall was the one the photographer had taken on the balcony. It was framed simply in black wood. Every morning, it was the first thing she saw, a reminder of the woman she had promised herself she would become. The divorce had been as messy and public as Richard could make it. His initial fury had given way to a baffling sense of indignation. He couldn't comprehend her actions. In his mind, he had given her everything: a penthouse, status, wealth. He offered a larger settlement, then a larger one, attempting to buy her back into submission, to make her disappearance fit a narrative he could control. When she refused everything except what was legally hers, requesting none of his personal fortune, he was left bewildered. His lawyers portrayed her as unstable, a woman having a midlife crisis, but Eleanor, with the quiet support of her own legal counsel, remained serene. She didn't fight back in the press. She simply signed the papers. Taking his money would have meant she was still a part of his story, a transaction. She wanted a clean break, a life built by her own hands. Her real work was at the shelter, which she now helped to run. She had discovered that the quaint hobby Richard had dismissed was, in fact, her superpower. She used her knowledge of art and design not for opulent parties, but to transform the stark institutional spaces of the shelter into places of warmth and dignity. She sourced donations of quality furniture, painted walls in calming colors, and hung prints of powerful female artists like Artemisia Gentileschi in the hallways. She believed that healing required not just safety, but also beauty. She curated a space that told the women who came there that they were worthy of it. One sunny afternoon, as she was arranging a bouquet of fresh flowers in the shelter's common room, Olivia and Thomas walked in. She had been in contact with them through cautious texts and calls, giving them space to process their father's anger and her departure. Now, seeing them standing there, looking hesitant but hopeful, her heart swelled. "Mom?" Olivia said, her eyes scanning the vibrant, welcoming room. "This place, it's beautiful." "We wanted to see what you were doing," Thomas added, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He looked around, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It's incredible." Eleanor pulled them into a hug, a real, heartfelt embrace, miles away from the stiffly posed photos of their past. They spent the afternoon with her, not as the children of a CEO, but as 2 young adults meeting their mother for the first time. They saw the passion in her eyes when she spoke about her work, the easy camaraderie she shared with the other staff members, the genuine respect she was given, a respect she had earned, not one that was granted by her husband's name. As they were leaving, Thomas turned to her. "I'm proud of you, Mom." The words were simple, but they were the validation she never knew she craved. She had not broken her family. She had shown them what it meant to be whole. A few weeks later, she had a final chance encounter with Richard. She was leaving a small gallery downtown when a black town car pulled up. The window rolled down, and there he was. He looked older, tired, the charm replaced by a visible strain. "Eleanor," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. He stared at her as if she were a ghost. She wore a simple linen dress, her hair was cut shorter, and she wore no makeup, but she had never looked more radiant. "Richard," she replied, her tone neutral, devoid of anger or bitterness. "What is all this?" he asked, gesturing vaguely at her, at the street, at her entire existence outside his control. "This act? Are you done playing the martyr? Your friends, my clients, they ask about you." Eleanor gave him a small, sad smile. He still didn't get it. He never would. "They're not my friends, Richard. They were your audience. And I'm no longer performing. I'm happy." The word hung in the air between them, simple and irrefutable. It was a currency he couldn't trade, a success he couldn't measure. He stared at her, searching for the broken, compliant woman he had known, but she was gone. Seeing no path to victory, no way to control the narrative, he simply nodded, his face hardening into a mask of cold indifference. The window slid up and the car pulled away, disappearing into the flow of traffic. Eleanor watched it go, feeling not a shred of regret. She felt nothing at all for him. He was just a man in a car, a part of a past that no longer had any claim on her. She turned and walked down the sun-drenched street, a sense of profound peace settling over her. The penthouse, the parties, the man who wanted to erase her from the picture, they were all just shadows of a life that was never truly hers. Her story wasn't written on a holiday card or in a company newsletter. It was written in the vibrant colors on a shelter wall, in the grateful eyes of the women she helped, and in the quiet strength of her own heart. She was the main character now, and she was finally writing a story worth telling.